Good evening and welcome to this APTA Facebook Live event, Advocacy on the 2022 Proposed Medicare Fee Schedule. Hi, I'm Justin Elliott, Vice President of Government Affairs here at the American Physical Therapy Association. Well, a couple weeks ago, we saw the proposed 2020 rule that will apply to outpatient therapy services under Medicare Part B. And unfortunately, as expected, we are seeing or looking at an additional round of cuts potentially in 2022 to a whole range of providers, physical therapists, surgeons, occupational therapists, physicians. And once again, just like we did in last year in 2020, we are rallying to fight the cut. Fight not only proposed cuts to the Medicare fee schedule, but also the PTA payment differential, which is scheduled to go into effect on January 1st, 2022. Now, folks may remember last year, summer of 2020, CMS rolled out a proposal that would have initially, in the proposed rule, have resulted in a 9% cut to physical therapy services in 2021. Now, the physical therapy community rallied, and APTA members, their friends and colleagues, turned out in an unprecedented advocacy effort. Advocacy effort aimed not only at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services on the proposed rule, but also with their members of Congress, advocating with members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, urging Congress to intervene. And thanks to your advocacy, we were able to get Congress to listen. And as we saw in December of 2020, Congress did intervene and provided an additional $3 billion in new funding for the 2021 Medicare fee schedule. They also made some delays on the proposal from CMS. And as a result, the proposed 9% cut for physical therapy for 2021 was reduced to approximately 3.3% for most providers. Now, no cut is ever acceptable. And for that to happen during the middle of a global pandemic makes it even more ridiculous. But unfortunately, what we saw in the proposed rule just released a few weeks ago is that CMS is continuing to move forward on this proposal that's doing some adjustments in the fee schedule that as a result, numerous providers are facing cuts across the board. In addition, what we will see in January 2022, unless CMS changes plans or if Congress doesn't intervene, is the implementation of the 15%, or it should say the 15% reduction on what's known as the PTA and OTA payment differential. And so once again, we're going to rally and we're going to advocate and we're going to make our voice heard, not only with CMS on their proposed rule, but also with our members of Congress, urging them to intervene and provide additional funding and assistance to physical therapy and the patients we serve. But we're not alone. We are working together with a whole host of other impacted providers who are in the same boat with us in terms that are also facing deep cuts. So joining me now is my APTA colleague, who has been knee-deep in the Medicare fee schedule in the proposed rule. I'm going to introduce Kate Gillard, who is the Senior Regulatory Affairs Specialist here at APTA. She does both policy and regulatory affairs at APTA. And Kate, you have been reading and reviewing and analyzing this proposed rule ever since it came out. Tell us a little bit about what's in it, what was a surprise, and what was not a surprise.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. We have been working around the clock to analyze all 1,741 pages of the fee schedule. And like you said, a lot of it wasn't a surprise because a lot of the issues we're dealing with this year actually go back to the rule a couple years ago, like you said, when CMS wanted to give primary care physicians a raise. They had to give other folks a cut because the physician fee schedule has to be budget neutral. So as Justin just explained, we were up for a 9% cut. Due to some interventions from Congress, it got reduced to 3.3. But unfortunately, one of those interventions from Congress, a $3 billion infusion of money into the Medicare program, runs out at the end of the year. Accordingly, CMS has to revert back to the loss of those funds, and that is why we are going to see a drop in the conversion factor of 3.75%. So the conversion factor is what's used to determine actually how many dollars you get for a service you provide. RVUs are a base value of a code, but until it's multiplied against the conversion factor, you really don't have a payment amount. So this conversion factor is dropping by 3.75% for all provider types. This is not an attack on physical therapy, and I want to make that clear. This is an across-the-board cut to all services under the fee schedule. So that is in some ways a silver lining because it means that we have allies in the fight against it. Also worth noting is that some of the RVUs did change in the fee schedule. So for instance, evals and re-evals actually might end up being reimbursed at the same amount as they are this year because they got a little bit of an increase in their value. But unfortunately, other codes did see a little bit of a cut. So some codes might see more, some codes might see less cut. But what your overall impact to your practice is going to be is going to depend on the mix of codes you bill. But we're projecting the impact to physical therapy to be about a 3.5% cut in 2022 if this proposal goes ahead as planned. So we're obviously fighting it. We're not going to accept this by any means. And we're going to be arming you all to help get involved in advocacy as well. So that's kind of the situation with the cut. The overall cut. But I also want to touch on the PTA differential because we have not been sleeping on that issue at all either. So as we expected, CMS is moving forward with implementing the PTA differential in 2022. They're required by law to do this, unfortunately. So they are moving ahead. We have been advocating to them pretty much since the original genesis of this policy for them to take mitigating efforts to sort of ease the pain of the PTA differential. And unfortunately, they have not yet taken up our asks, but we did secure some very important wins on the application of the CQ modifier this year. So it's great to see that CMS is already listening to APTA. We've had a lot of meetings with them, a lot of letters and phone calls. And they have acquiesced to some of our demands on when the modifier actually gets applied. And it's nice to see that in the proposed rule, so we don't have to fight for that during the comment period. Now, once the final rule gets put out, we'll be able to issue some guidance on exactly when and where the CQ modifier gets applied. But in the meantime, our asks to CMS on the PTA differential are pretty much three things. First, they need to delay the whole thing for a year. We are not out of the pandemic. Physical therapy is one of the hardest hit professions, and it is just unacceptable for them to be implementing a payment differential when we're already suffering from the pandemic and all of the fallout around that. Not to mention the fact that even though we got some wins on the CQ modifier this year, the fact is CMS has been working on this policy for 2 years and they're still changing it. They're still figuring it out. So that's pretty good evidence that this is a very confusing policy. And if CMS needs 2 years to figure it out, they should give providers more time to figure it out too. The final rule is probably going to come out in November, and that's only going to give folks a few weeks to figure out how to apply the CQ modifier. Accordingly, they need to delay implementation altogether. The other thing we're asking for in regards to the PTA modifier is a exemption of rural and underserved areas. It's hard enough to stay in business in these areas. It's hard enough to find a provider in these areas. They should not be subject to any additional cut. PTAs tend to be used more in these areas, and so they'll actually feel the pain worse than a lot of areas. So we are advocating for a complete exemption for rural and underserved areas. And finally, the last thing that we are asking CMS to do on the PTA differential is to change supervision requirements in private practice. So PTAs currently have general supervision in every setting under Medicare, except private practice, where they're subject to direct supervision. Aside from the fact that that's just not good policy to have different supervision requirements in different settings, CMS should allow PTAs to practice at the top of their license, depending on state law. If their state allows them to practice under general supervision, who is CMS to come in and say that they can't do that? So we are advocating for that as well, is that will also provide these PTAs some additional flexibility in their employment. It'll make them more valuable to their employers. It doesn't make up for the difference in payment, but it does make them, a more useful and valuable employee. One little glimmer of hope on this issue is that, so during the public health emergency, CMS has temporarily allowed for direct supervision through virtual presence. And that's sort of like, general supervision, you have to be available by a phone call. Direct supervision through virtual presence, you have to be available by audio visual. So it's like the difference between a phone call and a FaceTime. CMS is considering making this policy permanent. So that would at least be something of a consolation prize if we aren't able to get the supervision requirements for PTAs in private practice changed. A win on direct supervision through virtual presence would be something. So Justin, I just threw a lot of information out there very quickly. Not sure if you have anything to add to that.
No, and I think, again, with this proposed rule, at least when it comes to payment cuts, we have two major issues. Obviously, the cuts to physical therapy, which again, projected to be around 3.5, but again, that's going to vary on a variety of things. And, it could be higher, it could be, at 3.5. And of course, the PTA differential, which is, I should also mention, also applies to OTAs. This is a PTA and OTA differential. So it's something that we will be working with our friends in the OT field to collaborate and work on together. Now, Kate, one of the things right now, it's open comment period with CMS. They are taking public comments, and we need to gin up as many comments to CMS, make our voice loud and clear to them. I know that we have put together some template letters. Tell us a little bit about that. What is the deadline, and what are some ways that folks can get involved?
Yeah, great question. So I know a lot of people, when they think about advocacy, they think about Congress, but there is just as much work that needs to be done to CMS right now. So the deadline to submit comments is September 13th. Burn that date into your brain, because we are trying to get at least 10,000 comments submitted to CMS before the September 13th deadline. It's really important that CMS hears that we are not okay with these proposals. CMS has the power to make a lot of changes, especially on the PTA issues, without Congress even getting involved. And if we can get as many wins secured before we go to Congress, it makes Congress more likely to help us out, because we're not coming to them with this laundry list of problems that they need to fix. So you've got to get your comments into CMS. CMS is required to read your comments. They're required to respond to them. And if we can get enough comments submitted, they just might do what we're asking them to do. So we know you guys are busy. You've got day jobs. You don't have time to sit around and write letters to CMS. So we did it for you. If you go to apta.org and use our Patient Action Center, which you can find by clicking Advocacy and then Take Action, go to the Patient Action Center, you can submit a letter to CMS in just a few clicks. And this letter in the Patient Action Center covers the cuts. It covers the PTA issues and those three asks I just outlined. And it also covers telehealth, which we're going to talk about in a second. But, those are the big three issues in the fee schedule this year. If we can get enough comments on the record to CMS before the September 13th deadline, we might actually get them to turn around on these policies, and we wouldn't even need to go to Congress. But even if we do need to go to Congress, and I'll let Justin get the details on this, it's really important that we put it on the record that we're opposed, because some members of Congress kind of use comments to CMS as a measuring stick, as, is this really a big deal? Did anybody even bother to comment? It must not be that important unless people are willing to submit comments. So if we can get 10,000 or more comments submitted to CMS, it's going to make Justin's job a whole lot easier, because he's got a lot of work to do on Capitol Hill. Isn't that right, Justin?
Oh my gosh, yes. So, right now our focus is generating comments to CMS before that September deadline. But, while we're going to advocate and raise our voice and get on the record strongly with CMS, and we are hopeful they'll do the right thing, we can't rely that they're going to do the right thing when the final rule is proposed or at least released, come November. And so we're going to need congressional intervention. We're going to need congressional intervention on the fee schedule cuts. We're going to need congressional intervention on the PTA and OTA differential. Now, what do we want Congress to do? Because again, last year they provided $3 billion in new funding for this year, 2021, which provided mitigation. What we want them to do is to provide more funding for 2022 and 2023, or even more years after that would be great as well. And we want them to provide this funding because for the short term, if they can prevent these cuts in the short term, that provides us and other impacted providers to have that discussion, a more thoughtful, lengthy, pragmatic discussion with Congress and with CMS about what are some of the long-term structural changes, reforms that need to be done to Medicare Part B, to the fee schedule. Because we don't want to be in the situation of, year after year having to play defense. We're playing offense on a number of issues, but if we have to keep playing defense, we're never going to move the needle. And so we need to get out of this route of just cycle of with CMS, because there's some fundamental flaws with the fee schedule. We know, as folks who have been participating in what's known as the MIPS program, which is supposed to be providing bonuses for value-based care, that program is broken. It's not working for us. It's too administratively burdensome. And it's not working for a lot of other providers. We need to look at ways that we can reform this. So APTA is leading a charge with our members and our patients and our colleagues and friends. But as Kate mentioned, we're not alone in this. We are part of a coalition. We refer to it as the Fee Schedule Coalition, where we are working with the American Medical Association and the radiologists and the pathologists and the surgeons and the OTs, SLPs, audiologists, over 36 providers working together in a unified voice to tell Congress that we need them to intervene yet again. Now, right now, there is no bill in Congress yet. And, Congress, it's August recess, so of course they're not in town. But we are focused right now on CMS with the understanding that after Labor Day, and as we get into fall, that's when we're going to start seeing some action in Congress. And what we've heard from Congress also is they want a unified voice. They want one bill that this fee schedule coalition is going to endorse and rally around. They don't want any rogue bills out, trying to do this. They want one solution. So that's what we're going to be doing congressionally on the fee schedule cuts. The other thing we're looking at doing, of course, is on the PTA and OTA payment differential, as Kate lined out. Those three asks that we're going to be making to CMS. Again, we can't trust that they're going to actually do that. We need congressional intervention. And we're looking at a legislative vehicle that would basically direct CMS to do that. It would be a bill that, Congress would say to CMS, you have to now provide an exemption. You have to, for rural and underserved areas, you have to do a year delay. You have to change the supervision. So we have two big issues, fee schedule cuts, PTA differential. We're doing a regulatory push right now before the CMS deadline, and we're going to be working with Congress through the end of the year to fix this. Again, we're going to have aggressive advocacy campaign. I think last year we had over 100,000 letters from APTA members and colleagues and friends that went to Congress on the fee schedule cuts, and we're going to blow that away this year and just to keep that advocacy. But, we talked a lot about the cuts. Kate, there are some other things in the fee schedule that I know we want to maybe touch on. A big issue, of course, is the issue of telehealth. You maybe want to give a quick and dirty as to what's going on with telehealth in this year's proposed rule. Yeah,
so telehealth, of course, since the beginning of the pandemic has become one of the biggest issues there is. I remember, pre-pandemic, we were wondering if, maybe we can get a telehealth demonstration. And now it's just telehealth everywhere, right? So we have been advocating for CMS to permanently include physical therapy services in telehealth for some time. As you guys know, we are currently allowed to bill Medicare for telehealth services because of some emergency waivers that are only available during the public health emergency. So in order to bill Medicare for telehealth, you got to have two things. You've got to have telehealth codes and you've got to be a telehealth provider. So CMS only has control over the codes. Who's a provider comes from statute. So right now we're authorized as providers only under this emergency waiver during the public health emergency. So in order to be permanently allowed to use telehealth, it's going to require Congress. Now, what's going on with CMS and the fee schedule is that in the meantime, we've been trying to get CMS to go ahead and put our codes, our CPT codes that we use most often, on the list of services allowed to be billed for by via telehealth. We say to CMS, you know what, we're working on this on Congress. We're going to get ourselves added to this list. Go ahead and take the first step, put the codes on the list so that when we get added, it's a seamless transition. We don't have any hangups. We don't have to wait for another fee schedule rule cycle to go around. We can go ahead and do it. Unfortunately, CMS has not been very receptive to that idea. They're worried that it's going to cause confusion and make folks think that they've got permanent telehealth when we still got to get Congress to intervene and put us on the list. So we're still going to advocate for them to add our CPT codes to the list because, look, both things have to happen for us to get permanent telehealth. So APTA is going to continue to advocate as aggressively as possible on both things. So in the meantime, the template comment letters that we've got available includes the telehealth argument. All three fee schedule issues are included in the letter on the Patient Action Center. But we are not sleeping on Congress either. Isn't that right, Justin? We've already got a telehealth bill ready to go.
That's right. And, Kate, one of the things about telehealth that, we've seen it be a useful tool during the pandemic for patient access and for small businesses, for therapy clinics. And, when we talk to members of Congress about telehealth, I want to be clear on this. Telehealth, it's an option. It's something that is not going to be for every patient. It's not going to be something for every condition. And it's not going to necessarily be a good fit for everybody. But for some patients with certain conditions and the right diagnosis or right certain situation, it's a good option to have. It's at least good to have that option. And one of the things, though, that Congress needs to do is to change the statute and specifically add us as authorized providers of telehealth under Medicare. So we do have legislation working with our friends at AOTA and ASHA, the OTs and speech language pathologists and audiologists, on a bill that would do just that. It would permanently add PT, OT, speech, and audiologists as permanent authorized providers of telehealth under Medicare. The House bill, that bill number is HR 2168, bipartisan legislation led by Congressman McKinley, a Republican from West Virginia, and Congresswoman Mickey Sherrill, a Democrat from New Jersey. I think we were over 35 House co-sponsors last time I checked. We have a Senate companion bill, which we are eagerly awaiting introduction in the United States Senate. And so we really are in a race against time, because here's what's going to happen. At some point, the public health emergency will be declared over. And when that happens, all the waivers that we've had during the national emergency go away. And the waiver that allows us the option to use telehealth goes away. And so we need to have this bill enacted and put into law before the public health emergency ends, because that would be a shame to lose that ability. Now, when is the public health emergency going to end? I think at this point, we're looking at maybe mid-2022. So, but it could be sooner, could be later than that. But we can't rest on our laurels, and that's why we have legislation specifically on the telehealth issue that we're advocating for and working on. And again, also, as Kate mentioned, working on with our fee schedule. So never a dull moment.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot going on right now. We are definitely working around the clock. Justin and I are here in the office at 6:30. We haven't gone home yet. We're working on this. And so what we need from you guys is to help us get across the finish line. Last year, we got the cut reduced from 9% to 3.3% because you guys got involved. If it weren't for your comments to CMS, your letters to Congress, we wouldn't have been able to do that. You guys showing up and using your voice makes policymakers take us serious when we present our arguments on behalf of the association and behalf of the industry. Because you guys come out in such amazing numbers, we are taken seriously. So we really have to work together. So step one, comments to CMS before September 13th. But then stay tuned, because whatever CMS doesn't change the way we want it to change when the final rule comes out, we're going to be taking that argument to Congress. So we'll need you again closer to the end of the year in order to get our wins from Congress. But like I said, right now we are focused on CMS. We're focused on submitting comments. I want to make it really clear that you do not have to be a member of APTA to use our comment letters in the Patient Action Center. You do not have to be a physical therapist or a physical therapist assistant. Your mom can submit comments, your neighbor can submit comments, your husband, wife, friends, whoever, and that link is open to the public. It is not a member protected benefit. We want everyone and anyone to submit comments. So tell your patients, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to lose access to these important services. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell the people that work at the front desk at your clinic. Anybody can submit comments, and we're just thrilled for anyone who wants to use our letter to do it. So share that link as widely as you can. The next big event we've got planned is a virtual rally on September 1st. We're going to have kind of events like this going on throughout the day to really drive up support on social media and really get the word out about how you guys need to be submitting comments before the September 13th deadline. So feel free to, like and share any of the posts we have about submitting comments and RSVP to the event so you get a reminder to tune in, because we're going to have members speaking. We're going to have different folks from APTA speaking, and it's going to be a lot like this. We're going to be breaking it down for you and hopefully making it easy for you guys to submit comments, because like I said, our goal is 10,000 comments this year to CMS. And if we can lay that down, then we've got a really good chance at getting CMS to make some positive changes and getting Congress to take up our cause as well. So that's about all we've got planned for this evening, but we hope you'll come back on September 1st. Justin, do you have any closing thoughts for folks?
I would say, listen, I know that these are challenging times, and this is a tough situation to deal with. Fee schedule cuts, PTA differential. We're still dealing with the pandemic, but one of the things that is so great about the PT profession, about our APTA members, is that when the chips are down and we're faced with a challenge, we don't take it lying down. We stand up, we fight, we make our voice heard. And this is where membership matters, and this is where your voice matters. This is why APTA exists, to make sure that we can be unified and have a strong voice, to get our message through to CMS, to Congress. And so we've got a busy couple months ahead of us. And looking forward to what will be a robust and energetic and hopefully easy to engage advocacy effort. So, I just want to say, before I turn it back over to you, Kate, just thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for your membership. Thank you for your membership. We couldn't do what we do without your membership and your advocacy and engagement. So stay tuned, and we've got a lot going on.
Yeah, you hit on such an important point. And I want to say it again. We succeeded last year because of you guys. So don't lose faith. Like, we can turn this policy around, and we can get some very positive wins out of this. And it's going to take a little bit of effort, and us at APTA are going to try and make it as easy for you guys as possible. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. Obviously, the folks watching this are folks that care about stuff like this and want to stay engaged, and we appreciate your support. So submit comments to CMS, tell your friends to submit comments to CMS, and then come back right here on September 1st and join us for a virtual rally. And stay tuned for future advocacy actions to be happening later on in the year. And I just want to note, if you have any questions about anything in the fee schedule or anything advocacy related, email us. advocacy@apta.org. We will reply to your email. We will send you to the template letter. We will send you to the Action Center. We'll send you whatever you need. We want to make this as easy as possible. So thank you again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you again on September 1st.